All right. Hello, Facebook. This is Tommy Valentine, the Executive Director of Historic Athens. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of This Moment in History, COVID-19 in Athens, Georgia. By now, you're probably accustomed to the format of the show, but if this is your first episode, we want to take some time to introduce ourselves and let you know what you can expect. The first thing is that, just like the rest of the world, we are online these days, and that means internet bandwidth sometimes comes at a premium. If you experience any audio difficulties, any video difficulties as we're broadcasting, please stick with us. In our experience, in about 60 to 90 seconds, it tends to resolve itself. The other thing we just want to let you know is that this is not just something for you to watch, this is something for you to participate in. At the conclusion of this series, once we've completed all 55 episodes, we will be contributing this as a digital archive to our local libraries and research institutions for future generations. You can be a part of that historic archive by contributing a question, a comment, word of encouragement, whatever you'd like to include just below this video. So as long as we are still live, you can just share a comment right below this video. I can click a button on my end. It'll pop up on screen. We'll be able to address it live. So we'd love for you to take part in this discussion as well as watching today. So we do appreciate, I see folks coming in and we see our viewers pouring in right now. And so that's really great to see. We've really appreciated the support from the Athens community for this program as we seek to explore and document this unique and often challenging time in our community and world's history. So our guest today is Jeff Bishop. Jeff is going to be no stranger to many of you. He wears many caps in this community, and so I'm going to make sure that we give him some time to introduce himself and his relationship to the Athens community. Before we bring him on, just one last note. We want to thank our weekly sponsor this week. So a little later in the program, we'll talk about our annual sponsors, how you can become a sponsor or a member. But each week of this program, every 5 episodes, is brought to you by a different weekly sponsor. First American, actually, who Jeff works with, is the future sponsor of a week coming up. But this week is brought to you by the Athens Area Chamber of Commerce. So we want to thank David, Lindsay, everyone over at the Athens Area Chamber of Commerce for believing in this project and for supporting it through their sponsorship. Thank you so much. With that said, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring Jeff onto the screen. So give me just one moment to make that switcheroo. And then once he is on, we will make sure to get the program started. So just bear with us 1 second. All right. And one last switch here. Very good. All right, Jeff, hello. Welcome.
Hello. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, it's an honor to have you. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, one of the things that you should know is that in addition to documenting the answers that our interviewers give, one of the things that we're trying to document is the technical side of making all of this happen, and I'll tell you this, a few weeks ago we had a guest on and I asked them what they think the images of this crisis will be years from now, what we'll still remember. And they gave a really good answer, which was just lots of boxes and screens, lots of tiny boxes on your screen. You and I had to go through some technical challenges to get you here with us today. So I'm really thrilled that you helped us get through all that and get you on board with us today. So, Jeff, as I mentioned, there are going to be people tuning in that know you, that know your work, have worked with you. But there's also going to be people tuning in today, or maybe in future generations, that may not be as familiar with you. So can you take a moment and just kind of introduce yourself and talk about your relationship to the Athens community?
Sure, I'd be glad to. But before I start, I've got to point out the irony of this particular interview. Y'all can see me in my backyard doing this from home. This is the first time I've been home during the pandemic, during working hours. So I'm one of the few that was in the office.
That's right.
But to introduce myself, I'm Jeff Bishop. With First American Bank and Trust, I manage the mortgage division. I've been in Athens since 1987, when the University of Georgia attracted me to this town, and fell in love with it from day one, and have been a lover of the historic preservation in town, have been part of Tommy's group and really enjoy the community. I think Athens offers one of the broadest spectrums of interest and people, and it makes it such a great place to live.
Yeah. Well, so that's really interesting, Jeff. I know that we're going to get into the nitty gritty about what you do at the bank, what the bank does, how that's changed. But I want to talk more about that relationship to Athens because when I took this position shortly thereafter, I had the chance to sit down with you and, you've worked within our organization before it was called Historic Athens, when it was called Athens Clark Heritage Foundation. You currently chair the Historic Preservation Committee. I know the HPC, right? Is it committee or commission?
That's
I always get tangled.
Commission.
Okay. You would think if anyone should know this, it should be the executive director of Historic Athens. But the HPC, you've had this long relationship with preserving our town, and yet I got here in '88, and I think about how different Athens looks like to me than it did in '88. And that was, I got here when I was very young. Can you talk about some of the changes you've seen in Athens since '87? Some of the more notable things that come to mind?
Well, I would say the most obvious change to me is the downtown and the way that it has changed both in the type of commerce being done there and the people who are using downtown. It was still a sleepy town when I got here. The bar scene was very small. The music scene was big. And retail was kind of the old mom and pops that were hanging on after the mall moved out. There's been a big change in the food offered downtown, obviously the explosion in bars and the use of the downtown by students, and kind of a transition to where we're seeing some non-local businesses come in, the chains, the higher end commerce targeting college towns. And so we're seeing the evolution that way.
Yeah. I as someone who grew up here, it is always strange to walk by a large chain store. I think about a good example, and this may hit home for you. The corner shop that I still think of as the chocolate shop, where I could buy, candy cigars and things like that when I was a kid, is now a Subway. And that's just such a, it's such an interesting change. Are there any places in Athens, downtown Athens, that you particularly miss?
Barnett's bookstore is really one that I miss. That was a unique place that we didn't have in my hometown. And it was just a kind of, I guess before Google, it's where you went and had your mind expanded because you could see magazines with all different types of interest and ideas. It was a cross section of town, just a unique place to go and experience a college town.
Yeah. For those of you that are tuning in who have not been in Athens a long time, Barnett's was near where the Grill is today. And yes, I remember going in there. You could get magazines on every subject, books on every subject, comic books, which obviously made me pleased as a young person. But I can still, there's certain places you can remember how they look. There are also certain places you can remember how they still smell.
Yes.
And I still can picture the exact mixture of, I think, tobacco and old pages that Barnett smelled like. I'm not sure if that's something that sticks out for you, And
I'd like to clarify, when I speak of the magazines, I'm talking about the ones that weren't behind the counter.
Yes, there was a whole other private selection, I believe, as well. So all right. Missy Grant Wilson, one of our trustees, someone you're used to working with, just popped in the comment section to say grateful for his leadership with the Athens HPC. So Jeff, let's jump into that. So you're someone who, just by virtue of your position with the bank, I think there are probably plenty of people out there that would do that job and call it a day and go home, and because your job at the bank is already a very big one. But you've made a habit. I'm not sure it's been good for your free time. It's been good for Athens, but you've made a habit of volunteering in other capacities. Where does that compulsion come from? Where does that drive come from to serve your community in a volunteer role?
It's an interesting question. So I would say a lot of it came from my upbringing with my parents. I was involved in the Boy Scouts, and that was something that really drove civic activity and kind of built that foundation for me to want to be a part of the community and the part of where I live. For me, getting involved specifically in historic preservation, that came at a young age through my family, or my cousin living down in Beaufort, South Carolina, which at the time was a very sleepy but very historic town. And being exposed to the character and nature of history in a way that I didn't have in my hometown. And I just fell in love with that. And so my passion for old houses and old things kind of translated. And when I came to Athens, one of the things that caught my eye was the way that the downtown was preserved and still viable when most towns around the time that I was a teenager had sold out to the malls, and they were dusty and kind of decrepit and forgotten. And it was amazing to see when a community invests in resources it already has rather than throwing it away and moving on to something else, how interesting that town can become.
Right.
And I was also inspired, honestly, by the Athens. There are a lot of inspirational people who are involved in a lot of different things and set very good examples. So it was a combination of growing up with good parents and living around good people that set good examples when you come into Athens.
You know, I imagine we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about First American, as we should. Banks like yours are facing a unique challenge while also really providing really important services that I want to talk about. I know I've acknowledged, for those of you that watch the program on a daily basis, I've acknowledged that First American is the one who helped us survive by navigating the PPP loan process. So I want to take some time there. But before we get to First American, I want to double back to the HPC because I think the HPC is one of the more misunderstood organs of our community. And I'd love for you to take some time to talk about how you got involved with the HPC, what kind of work the HPC does, just a little bit more context there. Would you mind sharing?
Don't mind at all. So I'll take you back to the beginning of the HPC interest. My wife and I bought a historic house over on Hill Street and actually got involved with Athens Clark Heritage Foundation as a way to make contacts in the community that knows old houses. And so through that, we were introduced to contractors and builders and specialists that were focused on historic preservation. And after we bought the house, actually before we bought the house, we were also aware that we were going to be going through the HPC, or the Historic Preservation Commission, to make sure that the renovations we're doing on our house meet certain community standards in historic districts. And that process went well. Fast forward to my involvement with the Athens Clark Heritage Foundation, one of the things that we tried to do was educate folks about preservation. And the people who need it the most are people who live in historic districts, because it impacts them directly on what they can and cannot do to their houses. And as you alluded to, it is the Historic Preservation Commission is a bit misunderstood, mostly because most of us don't understand what the rules are or know where to go to get information about it. If any of you who are familiar with historic districts and renovations, you may have heard from people living there periodically complaints about the process. I couldn't do what I wanted to do to my house, or, I went with this great idea and it got poo-pooed when I discussed it with staff downtown at Planning and Zoning. My motivation to get on the HPC was not to only serve the community that I'm a part of, but also to help educate folks and be part of a solution for those people that you hear complaining about the process.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I really led into that well, but
yeah,
I wanted to serve the folks that live in historic districts. As someone who's renovated a house, I feel like I understand the process and want to be there to help fellow citizens.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I think one thing that's important to point out, because since taking on my position, I've started attending the HPC meetings is I think some folks may have a perception of the HPC as kind of a tribunal, when in fact, from my experience, it seems to be much more collaborative than that. In general, in my experience, it seems that the folks on that committee that are volunteering their time, like you, are rooting for these homeowners or trying to find a way to mix, I love the phrase you use, community standards, trying to find a way to still protect those community standards while also still honoring the right of the homeowner, the vision of the homeowner, their dreams, their hopes. How do you manage that balance as you're chairing that group?
It's usually pretty easy, but here's the key. The homeowners should talk to staff down at Planning and Zoning. Amber Eskew or Bruce Lonnie are great resources, and they will help. Well, let me take you one step back. If you live in a historic district and you want to renovate or do something to your house, go online, Google Athens-Clarke County Historic Preservation, and you'll find an easy link to the guidelines appropriate to your historic district. When you read through them, they're not actually that strict. They just help guide whatever work's being done to stay within a certain group of standards. And typically, I would say when we run into any type of friction in the HPC from a homeowner or a proposal, it's because the design was made before they were aware of the guidelines.
Got it.
If you go in and do your designs knowing what the guidelines are, there's a lot of space to be creative and to do some really neat things with old houses that I would never think of, but they clearly meet the guidelines. So I guess my advice for a smooth experience, which most of our applicants, I would say, have success and approvals, is to consult the guidelines first online, make an appointment with staff to review what you want to do second, and the third and final leg is to come meet with the Historic Preservation Commission for us to review. And we're advocates and we're fellow homeowners and citizens, so we're here to help people, not to be obstacles.
Got it. So Jeff, let's talk about your work with First American Bank and Trust. And so, the name First American should not be a new one for most people in the Athens area. One thing that I know I've talked to you about, I've talked to Julie about, I've talked to just folks about in general, is in recent months and years, the identity of Athens and the identity of First American have really become very deeply entwined. I know that your bank has done a lot to celebrate things that give Athens some of its defining character. I know that the bank has worked really diligently since the coronavirus hit to, inspire courage, but also I think provide resources to the community. It seems like a pretty unique relationship between a bank and the community around it. Can you tell us a little bit about the ethics and culture of First American?
Sure. Well, I think the thing that defines First American is the fact that we're a community bank. And as a community bank, that means that we serve the local community. Our owners are local. Our employees are all local. Our decision-making is all local. And we're able to take in the nuances of our place when we make decisions. Also, our customers all come from this place. So we have to be very attentive to the needs of this town, because that's what drives our business. And we're aware of that. And we know that if our customers are successful, we're successful. And it's a really cool partnership. And it's been a lot of fun for me too, to see some of this growth in how we advertise our services as a bank, but tie it in with those customers that have chosen to work with us and allow us to exist.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the bank? Because you were not founded in 2019. I mean, this is a bank that's been around. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we celebrated our 90th birthday a couple of years ago. We were founded in 1928, which
Wow.
was probably a year later, in hindsight, probably a tough decision. But we made it through the bad times back then and have been around since. We're a conservative bank. We don't necessarily go and try to break new ground on high loan to values or really high interest rates on CDs. We're built for the long haul, and we're here to be able to serve our customers consistently through thick and thin, through crisis and growth. And I think our leadership's done a great job with that. Our current president, Rhodes McClanahan, brings some youth or some relative youth to the position. He's a couple years younger than me and is part of the family that owns the bank. And it's really great to see that entrepreneurial spirit built in with your leadership.
And then tell us about your role in the bank. I think that one of the obviously the occasion for having this conversation is COVID-19 and trying to document that moment. But one of the things that we've heard a lot of feedback from our audience is it's also been an opportunity just to kind of understand all of the entities around them that they may not get. For a lot of people, a bank is just a place that they go when they need something, and they don't really understand how the sausage is made behind the scenes. Can you talk a little bit? How long have you been with the bank now, Jeff?
So I've been with the bank almost 3 years.
Okay.
Been in the mortgage business for almost 30.
Wow. So can you tell us about those 3 years and what you've learned and what you've done at First American?
Sure. Well, I not to be put in shameless plugs for my employer, but I came to First American because of the local focus and the ability to serve our mortgage customers in a way that meets the needs of Athens, Georgia, and not necessarily a broad spectrum of communities. And I think that makes it a little bit more customer friendly. And it certainly is more satisfying to see us work through some of the unique challenges that come with certain Athens properties or certain Athens borrowers, that we can use our local perspective and local knowledge to make smart decisions on behalf of those customers.
And tell us about your specific role. Can you go a little bit more into detail about what you do there?
Sure. So I'm the mortgage division director. So I manage the mortgage division. We're kind of a niche service of the bank in that the loans that we make, for the most part, are going to be your 30-year, 15-year fixed rate mortgages that will close and sell off into the secondary market. The secondary market is where these fantastic interest rates come from. So as much as we hate to have our customer send their payments to a different lender at the end of the day, it offers them a much better rate than banks would be able to offer if we weren't selling to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac.
Got it.
FHA.
Michelle Wynn, who's our interim director over at the Athens Welcome Center, just dropped a question in the comments section that I'd like to share with you. Michelle asked, is now a good time for small business owners to try a community bank on for size? I know a lot of people starting up businesses sign up with the, quote, easiest corporate bank that has all the mobile and tech capabilities, but then find themselves less than satisfied with their relationship with the bank. Can you give any advice out there for small business owners that are thinking about switching away from a large corporate bank to maybe a more community-oriented bank?
Well, I would say that community banks definitely have the ability to hyper-focus on the needs of the community. And I think we saw that with this COVID-19 pandemic, especially with the PPP loans. I'm really proud of the way our bank responded to that. We do have technology, but we also have the old-fashioned way of doing business. And in situations like this pandemic, the old way of doing business was very effective. We were able to work extremely long hours and push a lot of paper in a way to produce things that technology just couldn't get done in a fast manner. I think we have so far delivered about $55 million in PPP loans, which is fantastic. And based on what I've heard, that's impacted about 6,000 employees in the Athens area. And to me, that allowed community banks like us to shine. We're still processing them. So we started, as a bank, and as a bank who has customers and dealing with something like PPP, where there was a massive demand, we did have to take care of our customers first. And I was proud of the way that we did that, but we are able to help others after our customers are taken care of. So, we're still processing. So if someone is looking for assistance, we would love an opportunity to help.
Okay.
To kind of go a little bit further on that, I don't want to bash different types of banks, but there is a different relationship with a community bank than there is with these large banks. And I think the question kind of implied that we have technology. We've got great bill pay. We've got great online banking. We've got ways to overcome the fact that we don't have ATMs spread across the country. But what you get are local people when you work with a community bank, and local accountability. And I think that goes a long ways.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of a personal example. I won't mention the name of the large bank, but when I was, I guess 18 or 19, pulling some of my first paychecks, I remember going to a large bank that is here in Athens and starting up a bank account. And I had that bank account for, 15, 16 years. Worked with that bank, visited the branch, liked the branch. But I do remember it hit a point where they decided their business model was going to require me to have, I think $2,000 in my bank account at all times, or else I was going to get hit with like a $25 a month fee. And that had almost happened once or twice. I had gone to, I'd always been able to find another product at the bank that suited someone that was in their 20s or early 30s who didn't have that kind of cash on hand at all times. And I'd always been able to find one. And really, this was about 2 years ago. To your point, Jeff, we reached a point where the bank told me that we were no longer compatible. Where effectively it was the old breakup adage of if it's not you, it's me, and it was a really sad thing to have, because banks, one way or another, they are part of our lives. And it was such a jarring thing to effectively be told, unless if you're the type of person that keeps $2,000 on hand at all times, you should go find someone else. It does seem like at a community-oriented bank, they wouldn't be as quick to decide they're incompatible with one of their regular clients. Is that a fair assumption?
I think that the bottom line is a community bank knows the people they're banking.
Right.
There is a point. It's like everything in life. If you call the Social Security office, they're not going to know who you are, and you're going to get a different service level than if you called home aid for dinner. And talk to Mimi. So knowing people makes a big difference. And I think that is why the community banks shine in instances like that, not necessarily because a big bank's a big bank. But, that was leading into something, and I think I just lost my train of thought. But to kind of go into why I joined First American and why I think community banks are important is that every business is in business to make money. But in a situation like First American, every dollar that comes into our bank and every dollar of profit we make is recirculating back into the community. It might be going into paying my salary. It may go into paying our vendors, who we try to keep as local as possible. It's going to go to shareholders who live and work, and this money gets recycled in the community. It doesn't go to shareholders in California or New Mexico. It doesn't go to corporate office somewhere outside of Athens. And to me, that's really important to know that the things that I'm doing as part of my job, the net results are still going to have positive effects in my community.
Yeah. Alex Sams is here viewing, and he just shared a note here. He just said, as a realtor, I hear of a lot of issues with, quote, online mortgage companies, end quote, particularly at the end of the process. Jeff and his folks are proactive and deal one-on-one with our local families. Also, Jeff's knowledge of the historic neighborhoods is a plus. Jeff, I do want to tilt things towards COVID even a bit more than we already have, but I can't help but ask, what is the impact of your day-to-day work in the mortgage world that you have this affinity and knowledge of local history?
Before I start that, I want to point out that Alex Sams was a great leader on the Historic Preservation Commission and was kind of a inspiration for me. I always appreciated how he managed that. So thank you, Alex, for your service in that.
Thanks, Alex.
I don't know if I'm going to answer this question right, but mortgages, being in the mortgage industry for me is a great way to meet people coming into the community. I've always enjoyed it because it's a broad spectrum of Athenians. Almost everybody has an aspiration to buy a house, and it doesn't matter what your job is or what your background is. We meet everybody, and that's an interesting and great thing. How that relates to historic preservation, I'm not quite sure if there's a direct tie-in, other than I do see some really cool renovation projects when we do renovation loans.
Yeah. I imagine you get to get a front row seat. All right. So, Jeff, let's just kind of ask it point blank. How has COVID-19 changed the way you work?
Yeah, so it's interesting. And so being in the mortgage business and COVID-19, the mortgage industry hasn't met a crisis yet that hasn't caused us to go into full-on work mode. Unfortunately, and fortunately, I guess, but mostly unfortunate, in moments of crisis, we tend to see the financial markets completely freak out. And when that happens, it tends to drive down mortgage rates, which almost always creates a refinance boom. It's a welcome distraction in times like this, but it definitely can be difficult just because when your first instinct is to run home and hide and just weather the storm, we're getting calls from customers in volumes that we don't get normally. So for us, as this thing played out, it almost immediately created a rate environment that caused a massive influx of customer demand for refinances. In fact, we've had our busiest 3 months ever in the history of our mortgage division, thanks to COVID-19. It was extremely stressful at the beginning because the first thing we want to do is focus on the safety of our employees while we take care of our customers. And trying to figure out how to manage this was critical. The bank immediately addressed it by sending home everybody except for what we deemed critical employees. Fortunately, we were deemed an essential service, so we were able to work. As the bank went to a small amount of critical employees in the offices, that gave us some space to bring in our mortgage team and operate in our own individual offices. And we gave our employees a choice, but because they had spaces where they simply could walk in, lock their door or close their door and work and then leave, we were able to work in an environment where we could still collaborate and help each other and kind of get past some of this learning curve with Zoom and some of these other online connectivities. So that was interesting working through that. Fortunately, we made it through with nobody getting sick. We did have a couple of people who went home as things progressed. Kids would be sent home from daycares because of a COVID outbreak or a parent testing positive there. So we would send them home on an as-needed basis or an as-desired basis. We've been fortunate in the mortgage industry that digitization has really come into our business over the last 5 years. We rarely have to see our customers in person. We're able to deal with online applications, online signatures of important loan disclosures. Telephone and email work very well and are very effective in communicating with customers seeking and obtaining mortgages. We missed the face-to-face interaction, but fortunately, our industry became very efficient on working online before this outbreak happened. And I think a lot of people, not only people working with us, but working with whoever their mortgage lenders are, have discovered that they've been able to take advantage of refinancing during this outbreak without feeling uncomfortable. To kind of talk about experiences associated with mortgage, we've seen a lot of changes as the industry has adapted to how we did business versus how we want to do business with social distancing and trying to keep people apart. Fortunately, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who make the rules that dictate probably 95% of the business we do, quickly came up with some ways for appraisers to appraise houses without having to go inside. They've tweaked their automated underwriting systems, which we use to determine what kind of documentation we need from our clients, to where they would actually give us appraisal waivers in many cases. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have been gathering data on home values throughout the United States in this massive database, and they've been able to use that. So say you come to us for a refinance and we did your loan 2 years ago, your appraisal information was uploaded into this database. So we already know what your house is, and we know what houses are selling for around in this database. So we're able to make much better decisions on value without having to go through and do physical appraisals.
Sure. Jeff, I want to ask, I realize we've talked a lot about PPP loans on this call, but I also realize that we probably have some viewers that don't know what a PPP loan is. Can you talk a little bit about the PPP loans and the special place it has in your heart? I mean, I imagine it's been a big part of what the bank's done over the last few weeks. Can you talk about those?
I can give you a broad perspective on it. I'm a specialist on mortgage. PPP is what was being pushed out by Congress through the SBA to help small businesses cover payroll costs during this pandemic. It's money that's being loaned out at a very low interest rate. I think it's at 1%. It's designed to be forgivable if the money's used for the intended purposes, and it's a way to get. I cover somewhere between 1 to 3 months of payroll. I'm not quite sure the details there,
right?
But it's been really helpful for small businesses to keep on their employees, to continue to give them a paycheck,
right,
without having to be selling the goods and services that they typically sell to cover those costs.
Right. Yeah, I know that speaking personally, it was a game changer for us. We worked through your bank. We were able to so far keep our full-timers employed, which is something that, as a 501c3 really matters. You're fortunate when you get to work with good people. You want to keep them. So Jeff, going back to the idea of mortgages for a second, let me ask you a COVID-related question here. So with the way the markets have trended, I'm part of a group of a lot of my friends my age all recently bought homes in the last few years, right? My wife and I bought our first home where I'm broadcasting from right now. I guess 3 years ago. We're seeing a lot of our friends talk refinancing. There's a lot of talk about refinancing only a few years into owning a house. And I'm hearing a lot of contradictory information out there about how wise refinancing is for homeowners right now. What's the situation with COVID-related refinancing out there?
Sure. So it's a great time. If you have an interest rate on your mortgage over 4%, it's a great time to call your mortgage lender for an interest rate checkup. What we typically try to do is take a look at, well, first of all, we've seen mortgage rates drop. So the reason you're seeing your friends refinance is they probably bought a house and got a 30-year fixed rate in the neighborhood of 4 to 4.5%. Fantastic rates. Never thought they would drop below that. We've seen rates as low as 2.875% on 30-year fixed rates. They vary based on circumstances and by day because it's a market that moves daily. But what we try to do is determine a refinance. There's two components. You've got your interest rate and your closing cost. And for us and our customers, we try to make sure that the cost of the refinance can be recouped within about 3 years based on the interest savings you'll see on your monthly payment. Mm-hmm. And the reason we focus on 3 years is it's very easy to wow somebody with a low interest rate and a low monthly payment. But most people are thinking that they're going to stay in this house forever unless they're challenged. And so we try to make sure that when someone refinances, they're not wasting their money. If you get you save $50 a month on your loan, but it costs you $4,000 in closing costs that we finance into your loan, it doesn't feel like it costs you anything until you sell your house 5 years down the road, right, and owe a little bit more than what you would have had you not refinanced. So we try to avoid that situation. And so we talk with each customer and do an analysis for them to make sure it makes sense.
Excellent. Thank you. I see Amy Andrews has just popped up with a good question. I want to share that. I also have some additional COVID-related questions, and we still have about 15 minutes together. Before we go into this next round of questions, though, Jeff, please forgive me 1 second. I'm just going to very quickly thank our annual sponsors. So I'm going to bring up, for those of you that are viewing this, you're going to see a list of logos and names on your screen right now. These are our annual sponsors. The folks that you see up there, these are the people that give throughout the year as sponsors to help ensure that our organization is alive and well and that we're able to continue working to celebrate and conserve community heritage here in Athens, Georgia. If you see a business type or a name on there, whether it's Arcolab for their work with architecture, whether it's DSI for construction, whether it's Heirloom for a restaurant, any of these names, if you're doing business of a type, we encourage you to do business with the folks you see here. Also, if you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please consider visiting historicathens.com. You can also just become a member. We are very fortunate that we have folks around this community that support us as donor members. We absolutely rely on them. We're a 52-year-old nonprofit, but those bills still come in promptly every month. And so every dollar counts. You can become a donor member for as little as $5 a month at historicathens.com. And every member really, really, really helps. So thanks to everybody you see on screen. We also want to acknowledge that our weekly sponsor this week for this week's broadcast is Athens Area Chamber of Commerce. And we greatly appreciate the opportunity to do this program. So thanks to them. The image you see on screen right here, the Athens Welcome Center, which is one of our operations, started last week doing their own live cast each weekday at 2 p.m. Theirs are a bit different than these interviews. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, you can check in live with Michelle Wynn. She is remotely visiting one by one each of our National Register of Historic Places sites. And you can tune in for an interesting deep dive into those sites live from those sites. They're interactive. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you can tune in for different virtual workshops with Caitlin at the Athens Welcome Center. Today is a field guide to federal architecture. So as soon as this program's over, you can head over to the Facebook page for the Athens Welcome Center and check that out. The last image I'm going to show on your screen before we get back to Jeff, and I'm just going to do it briefly, but the names you see here, these are the 55 guests that have been kind enough to schedule an interview with us. You can see here on May 21st, we have Jeff Bishop. Tomorrow, we're speaking to Keith Kepner of Kepner Boxing. Monday, Memorial Day, we're speaking to Dr. Zernona Thomas, Acting Superintendent of Clark County School District. And you can see the list goes on. You also may see some names that have already happened that you wish you had caught that interview. The good news is if you go to the video section of this Facebook page, you can absolutely tune in to those past interviews and take a quick look at what those folks had to say. So I'm going to go ahead and get back to our interview here, but thanks to everyone that supports this program, either Jeff, like you as a guest and sponsor, or just our folks that are willing to do one or the other. We really appreciate it. So Jeff, let's tag back in here. So I want to bring up Amy's question. It's an HPC related one, and then we'll dive back into some COVID questions. But I think it's an excellent, maybe the $1 million historic preservation question. She says, what would you tell a resident of a neighborhood that doesn't want to become a local historic district because they don't want any restrictions on what they can do with their property? I got to tell you, Jeff, I'm really excited about your answer to this because I know you're someone that grapples with this a lot. What would you say to that person?
Well, first of all, I'm guessing that question comes from a desire to protect their private property rights. I completely respect. I would say this: historic districts were designed to protect the integrity and the character of the neighborhood. So being part of that is a positive for both you and your neighbors. I would pose a scenario in which your neighbor decides to tear down their house and build an ultra-modern 3-story structure, which in and of itself may not be a bad thing. But in the context of a neighborhood that was built 100 years ago with similar styles, I would argue that that would disrupt the rhythm and the character of the neighborhood. And that's the whole reason for the historic preservation ordinance, is to preserve the character of specific neighborhoods. I would also mention this because this is how I justify it. As a homeowner, I bought into a neighborhood knowing that it was in a historic district. And in doing so, I knew that I would be subordinate to these guidelines whenever I wanted to do something to my house. Some people may not be aware of it. And for those people, I am sympathetic. But for the most part, I would hope that homeowners know what they're getting into when they buy their houses. For somebody who's considering designation, I would argue that it's a good thing. I can speak from personal experience that my home value has gone up because of historic designation. And it's not just because of what my house is on its own, but it's what the neighborhood is and is becoming because of protections that through the historic designation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Jeff. And of course, we always want to acknowledge we're big fans of Amy Andrews. She, among other things, helps operate our fall heritage walking tours. Amy, I have our fingers crossed that we can get back out into the great outdoors this fall, because I can't, I'm sure our regulars can't imagine the fall without those tours. So, all right, just proceeding here a bit. So, Jeff, when we think further about COVID, there are 3 questions I like to ask each of our guests, and we'll get to those 1 second. I have to ask one last question here, though, because I really appreciate the context you've given us about everything from lending to, the general overview of the PPP loans, the way it's forced changes in how your bank works. You've exposed us to so many different things. But, as you were talking about being a lender, I was thinking about the fact, in literature, one of the more famous lenders, Shylock in Merchant of Venice, has this grand speech, right, where he says, "If you prick me, do I not bleed blood? Am I not still a person?" At the end of the day, Jeff, you are a person, and this has got to be stressful for you. This is, anyone who is in a leadership role like yourself over the last few weeks have found their mettle tested. They've had to recalibrate. They've had to, compartmentalize a bit, decide where the barriers of their work and life are. Can you talk a little bit about how you've grappled with that?
Sure. Well, it's been extremely stressful, but I can tell you from a business point of view, it wasn't as stressful as you would think. First, working for a company that gives us the ability to adjust on the fly is a blessing. More importantly, the team that I have, that I work with, they made this a breeze. They all came in with a good attitude and a focus on the customers that ask for our help. It's a sense of duty, and it's an honor to actually have that calling in a time of crisis. The people that we are really cheering on, and rightfully so, are the people in the health industry,
right?
Because it's a matter of life and death, and that's clearly more important than refinancing your mortgage or buying a house.
Sure.
But the world still revolves, and there are people that need to buy houses during this pandemic, and it's an honor to be able to operate in a way to serve them.
Yeah.
And on the refinances, that is I would say a luxury item, but there's a true tangible benefit that comes with each refinance we're able to do, which is saving a customer money. And I can't think of a more important time to do everything we can to help people with financial resources. And so from that standpoint, it's a blessing to be able to help folks save money so that they can reallocate the savings towards something else that we don't know each person's need, but this is a time where money comes in handy.
I'll say as a father of a young child, I know that every dollar in the monthly budget weighs on you, especially, there's so many families out there that have lost one or maybe both breadwinners. And that is any chance you can lower that overall monthly bill. That's a critical thing. Two comments that popped up, and then we'll get into our last questions here. Amy Andrews just commented the cross fingers emoji about fall tours. I will do that in real life, Amy. Thank you. And then I'm going to do a thank you emoji in real life because Susan Bogardis, am I saying that correctly, Jeff? I've interacted with her online. Okay. Susan Bogardis just popped in to say, hey, Jeff and Tommy, this is the real life thank you emoji to Susan. Susan was the loan officer at First American that Jeff connected us to. Jeff, am I getting her title right? Loan officer, or what would her formal job title
She's
be?
A commercial lender.
Commercial lender. But she's the one who helped us navigate the precarious world of PPP loans. And so we appreciate you tuning in and saying, hey, Susan. We also really appreciate you just existing and being who you are. So thank you very much to Susan. Jeff, I want to go to our final questions here. So first and foremost, if you woke up tomorrow, quarantine was over, all of your favorite Athens places were open again, how would you spend the day? Where would you go?
Wow. So there are so many places. So the fact that I'm not going to mention them all, I don't want anyone hearing this to think that I'm not thinking of them. Right. But because it's the first day after the pandemic, I would wake up, first of all, searching for Ike and Jane's, and unfortunately wouldn't be able to find them. Yes. So I would probably go to Ideal Bagel. And then I'd get on my bike and ride around town, kill some time, maybe get a snack at Independent Bakery, grab some lunch. Ooh, wow. At the National. I'll go to the National for lunch. And then try to make it a 2-course meal, starting out at Homemade and ending up at 5 and 10.
That's going to be hard to top, yeah.
And then I'm going to end the evening meeting up with some of my neighborhood buddies for some Tropicalia at Normal Bar.
There we go. Yeah, you're going to need all those biked off calories if that's where you're going to spend the day. But yes, that sounds wonderful. Yes, Normal Bar. And this is as good a time as any. We always like to emphasize on the program how many great business owners and entrepreneurs are out there figuring out ways to still accomplish what they do curbside. Normal Bar is a great example of that. If you haven't experienced it yet, Bain has been doing a really phenomenal job of what he's calling his CSA, but publishing each weekday a different cocktail menu, and you can buy the mixer and supply the liquor at home, or buy beer. And a lot of the places that you mentioned, Jeff, I miss that Kalamata olive loaf at Independent Baking Company. There's a lot of good things out there. So,
and can I interrupt for just a second?
Please. Yeah.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank every business owner who has come up with creative and safer ways to serve us. It's made this crisis a lot more enjoyable. Having those comforts are some of the comforts available for us to keep our minds off of the dead times and the waiting and the unknowns.
Yeah, that's worth saying. I think so often when we talk about curbside, we think about it through the lens of, oh, we're so glad that business is surviving. But yeah, if we had to navigate this situation week after week without some of our favorites, I think so many of us are cooking more than we used to, but it's so nice to be able to go out and celebrate a favorite dish or things like that. Julie just popped in to say, and she's cited this before. This is Julie Denton with First American saying, again, thanks for my COVID-19 pounds. And then she said, way to represent the FAB, or I'm going to say FAB, First American Bank, FAM, Jeff. So way to represent Jeff. And then this will be the last comment I share today. Susan, I really appreciate you saying this. Susan said, so happy that we could help Historic Athens and many other friends in our community. And we definitely send that love and thanks right back to you, Susan. Thank you. So, Jeff, last two questions here, and then we'll get you back onto your busy day. So, you know, when we come out of this recession, when we come out of this crisis, people are going to want to build again. They're going to want to start up again. And that's something we're excited about. You know, every place that we're celebrating in Athens, at some point, someone had to build. But in the historic preservation world, one of the concerns I'm hearing about is sometimes in a post-recession world, people are so eager to build that formerly really safe historic places can become endangered. You know, if you imagine for a second, Jeff, I know you said you came here as a college student. Excuse my train that's going by the house here. But, you know, if you imagine a young college student 50 years from now at the UGA library watching this interview with you, what are some of the historic places that you hope when he or she leaves that library, they can still visit? What are some places that you hope that we take some time to preserve?
Interesting. I mean, there's a lot. Normaltown is not a building, but I think the character of Normaltown would be important to preserve in some form or fashion. Mm-hmm. I think that's an important gateway to Athens. Yeah. And I'd like to see us find ways to protect that a little bit more. Wow. Put me on the spot as the HPC commissioner too, aren't you? Obviously the fire hall.
We can do a disclaimer like these views do not represent, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, what are some of those places for you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think other places that aren't protected. You know, the character of 5 Points, I think, tells the story of Athens. Gosh, they're landmark buildings, but I feel like most of those are well protected at this point. Golly, I apologize for not being on my toes with that.
These are great.
I think Millage Avenue, which is protected, it's nice to be able to drive down that and absorb what Athens is. Downtown, half of it's protected, is also something I think is important. You know, to kind of go to the opposite side of that, I hope this town can come up with a better way to manage college housing. I think that's a big problem and probably the biggest threat to historic preservation, in my personal opinion. I think it's one of our biggest friends, but also one of our potential biggest, I won't say enemies, but just conflict. I think this town needs to come up with a better way to locate and plan for long-term growth in student housing. It's been way too hodgepodge, and not only does it impact the character of our city, but the traffic patterns are clearly changing in a way that's going to make Athens different, and quality of life could be impacted.
Thanks for sharing that. So Jeff, I know we flashed 50 years in the future. We're going to flash an additional 50 years. It's not as far-fetched as you might imagine. You know, I know that recently we've been going through some of the old records of Athens in the 1918 flu to help us understand this moment. So let's say someone 100 years from now is tuning in to this interview. You know, as our final question today, what would you want that person to know about Athens during this moment?
I would say that we were extremely thoughtful in how we addressed the pandemic, but we were also conflicted. I think you'll get different feelings from different people. We're not through it, so my comments really aren't based on hindsight at this point. I think the community has come together in a great way, and it's been extremely peaceful, and we were blessed with a beautiful spring in which to shelter in place. But one of the fascinating things to me, and I don't know if I'm speaking to the question properly, is the impact of the unknown and the impact on fear on a population. As somebody who was born in 1969, I've never been through something like this.
Right.
I can't imagine. I would imagine there were similar feelings for those that were going to be drafted into World War II or World War I, or to go back further, being in the Civil War. It's fascinating to see, especially in a data-driven society that we move to, that when you take away facts, how quickly things descend into fear and how varied that fear reaction is in our town and in our country and in our world. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out and how history judges it. But it's been, fear is, I've had fear moments usually after watching the news, but there's plenty of times where I've been hit with this fear, whether I come down with the sniffles and think I'm getting COVID, or I've run into somebody and I didn't know where they were coming from. But when that fear gets a hold of me, it's amazing the reactions that I see myself have. It's interesting. And it's very interesting to see that amongst friends, coworkers, people I don't know. It's just, it's a very broad spectrum, and it's going to be very interesting to see how we come out of this. Something else that's been amazing to me has been the lack of the Winston Churchills and the Delano Roosevelts to come out and actually grant comfort through words at a high level. I don't think our generation has seen that like past generations have. And I don't know if that's because of the internet distracting us or what, but that's been interesting to me.
Yeah, we don't live in the era anymore where someone gives a speech and we listen to it and read it and obsess over it for weeks at a time. You know, you think about how Churchill could give comforting words, and then, you know, the nation, you know, the world would pour over them. Or as you said, FDR during, I still can't believe I'd never heard that First American was founded in 28, which is just so mind blowing to me. But
one of the greatest decisions ever.
Yes. Well, you made it. But yeah, I think that, Jeff, I think that that's a unique perspective, and one that I'm sure that future generations will appreciate having. This idea that it's been hard. There is so much noise and fear that it can be overwhelming. I do want to close by saying again that, you know, on the 501c3 end, we're feeling that fear too. And I really sincerely want to thank First American for the ways they've helped us relieve some of that fear and give us some clarity. So thank you to you and your bank.
We really appreciate being able to help. And we're thankful not only for our ability to help, but there are so many other banks and so many other service providers out there chipping in. So I want to thank all of those folks for doing their part as well.
Yes. Thank you so much. And Jeff, I'll say it again on air in the weeks to come when you guys are our weekly sponsor, when First American. But for now, just thanks again. You know, when you talked about your dollar staying local, that's a great example. We really appreciate the support from First American investing in a week of this program. So thank you.
I think this is a fantastic idea, and I appreciate you and your board coming up with this. I think it's a great way to not only document this pandemic, but to document Athens as we move forward for the future.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Thanks for saying that. To everyone who's watching now, you can head over to the Athens Welcome Center Facebook page to tune in to their live cast. You can also tune back into past videos at our videos section of our Facebook page. And we will be back tomorrow with Keith Kepner, owner-operator of Kepner Boxing, at 1 o'clock. So we hope that you'll tune back in. Jeff, you and I are going to hop offline here, but on air again, thanks for being here. And we hope that you're all, you and your family are staying safe and healthy. So thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, great. All right, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock.